If you love movies and movie discussions, you've come to the right place. Who am I, you ask? I am the Wiz, and I'm here today to review the 1992 Chinese romance war epic, Farewell My Concubine, starring Leslie Cheung, Fengyi Zhang, and Gong Li, directed by Chen. Kaige. You ever watch a movie and then suddenly realize when you're watching it that maybe you need to know more about what's going on when you watch it? I kind of felt this way during Farewell My Concubine, and it's mainly because of the setting and what's going on throughout the film, because it just feels like the more that you might know about what's going on, the more subtext that you can actually get, and that you would actually get more of what is happening in the film and the themes that are going on in the film. I mean, there is a good story that is very easy to actually understand as the movie goes on, but there's a lot going on in the background which I found incredibly fascinating. And that's the other thing too. Zero, the person I co-host with on some of the reviews on this podcast, mainly with the 007 debriefings this past year, is really into Asian culture and Asian history, especially Chinese history. And I've heard of some of the things that are going on in this film with conversations with him. I think I just needed to know more in this case when watching this film. But anyway, let's get into the review of Farewell My Concubine, directed by Chen Kaige. And before that, let's get right into the plot. Basically, this film is set in 1924, where a young Daiyi, played by Leslie Cheung, begins training at a Beijing opera house at the same time as Duan Xiaolu, played by Fengyi Zhang. Cheng specializes in playing female parts, often against Duran's commanding male leads. As they grow up, they become big opera house stars. And while that is happening, Cheng begins to develop romantic feelings for his co-star, which are pretty much not reciprocated at all. While he's not reciprocating his advances, Xiaolu is becoming romantically involved with a prostitute named Yuan, played by Gong Li. This film is set in a large swath period of time, about 50 years in Chinese history, based from 1924 to around 1974, I believe, or even more than that. And that is during a very tumultuous time in China. When you watch Farewell My Concubine, and you are going into the world that it's setting up, the first thing you're going to notice right away is that the film is very visually arresting in two very distinct ways. One is costumes and the other is set design. Now, you can probably look at the trailers of what's going on in the film and think that it mostly has to do with the operas that are being played on during the movie. And that is true. A lot of the plays that are shown off in the operas do have some really nice set design and some amazing costumes. I mean, the costumes in those plays are just colorful and beautiful to look at, with a lot of adorning jewelry and very complex looking visual motifs that are on the costumes, like very visual on that end. But I'm also talking about what happens outside of the plays. Mainly I'm thinking of times in the beginning, in the first 45 minutes to an hour, where the main characters are kids. You are in this opera training house that honestly is not in great shape, but also has a very distinct look to it that really feels lived in. And I think that's the key thing that I want to point out when watching this film. Everything felt lived in. Not that it's like dirty, but there is a feeling of history that is involved throughout the entire film that you can really feel as you're watching it. And I think it was one of the most fascinating things to watch in this film, is to feel the history. And it's just the look of the entire film really seems to want to highlight the towns that are in this movie, and what it feels like a very historical context. It's really interesting to watch in this movie. But really, the film is about two things. It's about the historical things that happen in China, and it's about these characters. If I'm going to be honest, the characters aren't as interesting as the historical parts of the film, but I really want to highlight one performance in this movie, and that's Leslie Cheung. His performance in this movie is haunting, and it's an incredibly well-done performance about unrequited love and a devastating trauma. When you watch the movie, it does seem like the film tries to highlight more of the romance aspects of this character and how he never gets what he wants. But if you really pay attention to the film, and it's something that I'm surprised that not a lot of people talk about, what happens to Daiyi in this film is harrowing. It is really disturbing at times. It's not entirely graphic, but I can imagine if this happens to somebody, it's very traumatizing at a young age. And that's where I think Cheung's performance is really well done. Because even though he's trying to earn the love that he wants from Xiaolu, and it doesn't happen, it's all melded in this performance that reminds you of just how badly his childhood was and what he went through, from the physical abuse to his mother abandoning him to the sexual assault that is implied in the end of that first act. And all of it is in the performance that Cheung is playing in this movie. And it's the one character in this film that really feels like it's constant, because you really feel those traumas that are going in around that character's head, and you believe what he's going through. I think Cheung does a magnificent job in this movie, playing as Daiyi in this. But like I said before, the historical aspects of the film, I think, are more interesting than the actual romance. Now, there's two romances in the film. There's the one with Daiyi trying to earn the love of Xiaolu, who is never going to do it. And then there is Xiaolu, who ends up marrying the prostitute Zhuan, played by Gong Li. I'll say first, the one between Xiaolu and Zhuan is not interesting in the slightest. It's not terrible, but it's really just a perfunctory type of romance, and it's just not something that's incredibly interesting. The more interesting one, of course, is the one with Xiaolu and Daiyi. It's only interesting because of Cheung's performance as Daiyi and how he portrays that performance throughout the film. It is really the more interesting romance in the film, I won't lie, but because that's where all the drama really is in this movie. There is some drama between Zhuan and Xiaolu, but most of the drama is involved with two guys in this film, and the depicting of a homosexual man that won't be able to live his passions and will not be able to live himself the way he would like to with the man that he loves. But again, it's really the historical aspects of this film that I think most engaged me. What was going on in the background, things that were happening politically that also mesh with the story in a certain extent, which is why I really wish that I knew more about what was going on in the background in this, because I think it would have made a lot more sense. It would have been a lot more fascinating to know. It's not that it's confusing when watching this film that you don't understand what's going on historically. You kind of get what's happening, but there are definitely things in the film that are in the background that are supposed to be cultural touchstones and markers that are supposed to denote certain things that are happening in the film, and without that knowledge, it just looks like window dressing, but I kind of feel like that's really not what it's supposed to be. My feeling on this is I'm probably going to watch this again at another time, but before I watch it, I'm going to have Zero recommend some documentaries or some YouTube channels or something that will teach me a little bit more about the history of what's going on in China around that time, because I'm really interested in seeing what exactly I missed. So here are the footnotes for Farewell My Concubine. If you can't handle child abuse depiction, the first 45 minutes are brutal. Oh my god, the first 45 minutes are absolutely brutal. Kids getting spanked constantly, hit, slapped. There is a stretching scene in the film as well. And then there is some mutilation as well. And then I mentioned the sexual assault that happens that is implied as well in the film. I would say if child abuse bothers you to a great extent, I'll give you two options. Entirely skip the scenes with the kids. I think that's the first 45 minutes of the film. Or just don't watch the film. I would probably say don't watch the film, because what happens in those first 45 minutes is integral to what happens with Daiyi and how he is the way he is and why he acts the way he does. In that end, I would say, honestly, skip it if you can't handle it, but you may have the option of just skipping those 45 minutes and going through the entire film as is, and that could be fine. But I think you will miss some context on the character of Daiyi. And my second footnote, definitely a movie where previous knowledge of Chinese history would enhance the enjoyment. I mentioned that at the end of the review, and I really feel this way. I feel like I'm underprepared watching this film because I don't know much about the history of China around that time. I don't know much about Chinese history, to be absolutely honest with you. As much as Zero has talked to me about certain things about Chinese history, I think knowing more would have enhanced my enjoyment of this. Am I saying that you should brush up on your Chinese history before watching this movie? I really don't think so. I think some people will actually enjoy this without knowing that history. I feel like that might help me in watching this movie. But it's not like I'm going to say this is a bad movie. I do think it's a good movie. I just think that maybe I will prepare myself more next time for a second viewing. Overall, I'm going to recommend Farewell My Concubine. I think visually it is stunning in certain parts. I think the performance of Leslie Cheung is excellent in this movie. It is a haunting performance that I thought was really interesting to watch. But if I'm being honest, I think the background and the historical parts of the movie are much more interesting than the characters in this film. I can see a lot of people really getting attached to Daiyi and what goes on with him. But Xiao Lu is not a character I was incredibly interested in. And that might be by design. Xiao Lu isn't really that deep of a character, but for him to be the romantic interest of the main character, I would have liked to have seen more of that character, but then again, that might not be what it was meant to be in this film. So overall, I am going to recommend Farewell My Concubine. It is on the Criterion channel right now, so check it out if you haven't. And it's going to be on 4K this month on the Criterion collection. I don't know if I'll pick it up. I might. I'm not sure. But overall, I do recommend Farewell My Concubine. Check it out on those services.
Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. Thank you for listening to this review. If you want to know what we're reviewing in the next couple of days, you can look on the screen right now to see what's coming up next. If you like what you heard, go ahead and leave a like on this video. If you want to discuss your opinion on the film or the review itself, please leave a comment. And if you want to hear more, subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening. I will talk to you next time.